I'm Eva, and I would like to welcome you to The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. If you're new, thanks so much for giving me a go. I record 2 different style of episodes lately, and this style will be one that includes a lot of features such as yarn reviews, book reviews, and not quite so much talk about my works in progress, although I do talk about finished objects. And then next week will be just about my works in progress. Returning viewers, of course, you already know that. And Thistle is with me today. There she is, my baby. She'll be excited that this is the more topic-heavy episode, since that means that she won't be disturbed as much. I am drinking iced chai because it warmed up a bit, and I had homemade chai left over in the fridge, so why heat it up when I can just drink it cold? And I am wearing my Formalized Curiosity cardigan, which is knit out of Quince & Company Sparrow, an organic linen yarn, using the lace cardigan pattern from the book The Art of Seamless Knitting. So I knit this earlier in the summer, and I wore it a lot during the summer, and now it's serving me well into transitional weather. Next year I'll really have to think more about how many plant fiber cardigans or sweaters I knit a year versus how many wool sweaters. But we'll talk about that later because this week's topic is going to be wardrobe planning. I think that I will announce the winner of the giveaway now, just so that you guys aren't in suspense. I was running a giveaway for 2 skeins of yarn from Mountain Meadow Wool Company, and they were willing to ship anywhere in the world. They're a very cool fiber mill. I think it's called a fiber mill. In my mind, it's a yarn mill, but anyway, based in Wyoming. And they really focus on developing good relationships with the local ranchers and then taking the fleeces and turning them into yarn in the most sustainable manner possible. So I was very happy when they asked if they could kind of send me some yarn to talk about on the podcast and sponsor a giveaway and all that, because I think it's important to get the word out about the yarn producers that are really thinking about the environment and the sheep and the ranchers or shepherds who care for the sheep. So all of that being said, quite a few of you entered. It was pretty fun to watch all the new entries after I mentioned it last week. And as the question was, what yarn do you admire, or something about the way it's made, I would highly recommend anyone interested in ethically produced yarn, go to that thread and you will see all kinds of different companies doing all kinds of different things, basically in a way that produces yarn thoughtfully. The winner is the Naughty Kitty, whose name is Susie, and she talked about wool. So congratulations, Susie. What I did was, some people had left more than one comment, which is fine. I'm good with chattiness. Ravelry tells you how many voices there are in a thread, which is how many individual people. So there were 82 voices, and I was one. So I put 2 through 82 in random number generator, and it generated number 4. So I just counted 4 people down, and that was Susie. So once again, congratulations. I'll give it a week or 2 to let you learn about it on the podcast, and if you hear about it, you can PM me. Otherwise, I'll PM you and get in touch. As I said, Mountain Meadow is going to ship that yarn, so you'll probably get it a lot sooner than if I was in charge of going to the post office. Sorry, my throat got very dry there for a second. Before I go on to the knitting, I wanted to take a little bit of time to thank everyone, even more than usual, because it is about the time for my 1-year podcast anniversary. The first episode went up at the end of September, so I missed that one. However, the 3rd episode was the first one on YouTube, and that went up in October, so I think that I'm close. When I began this podcast, it never occurred to me that I would have as many followers and make as many friends as I have. I mean, I never expected, I don't know, I guess, to gain the popularity that I have, which is not to say that I'm anywhere near, like the big podcasting names, but I am certainly far beyond my wildest dreams. And it's not so much the numbers that are important to me, although those are certainly flattering. It's more that I've made so many friendships with so many knitters, and I've learned so much from so many of you, and I've gotten so much encouragement, and it has meant the world to me. Because of my illnesses, I spend most of my time at home, and so being able to still have friendships and connect with people and have people cheer me on in the bad times and celebrate with me in the good times, it has just been an absolutely wonderful year, and I am so happy to have met so many of you. And I'm happy that even the people who I haven't met, like in person, are still enjoying listening to me ramble about knitting. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who watches, to everyone who leaves comments, to everyone who connects with me on Instagram or Ravelry, and to everyone who has sent me gifts of yarn or patterns or tools that make my knitting better. And of course, just the gift of your time, whether it's the time of writing comments or messages in the Ravelry group or the time of viewing the podcast. I cherish all of that. And I started this podcast hoping to create a little virtual knitting circle, and I've certainly done that. So, yes, I suppose I just wanted to say thank you all for making this such a fun and worthwhile hobby. It's almost grown into a little life of its own outside of my knitting hobby, although obviously if I stopped knitting it would be hard to podcast. But yeah, so thank you all. And now we will talk about some finished objects because I have some this week. Neither of them are blocked because I finished them quite recently, and if I blocked them, they would still be wet, so I wouldn't have been able to show them to you. First of all, I finished the One Fish, Two Fish mittens that I'm knitting for a friend's daughter who is also a friend. Like, she's 19. We get along well. She's also bookish and fun and sarcastic. Anyway, so this is her Christmas gift for this upcoming Christmas, and they match the hat that I just knit her, but it was her gift for last Christmas because I gave her an IOU, whatever you want me to knit note. So the pattern is free on Ravelry. It's made for children's mittens, but it's written for sport weight yarn. And it turns out if you use Aran weight yarn, 40 stitches in the body is perfect for a women's size small mitten. I did have to modify the cuff a bit because it draws in, but I included the details of that on my project page. The other major modification I did was I made them convertible because I just find convertible mittens much more useful for going about, daily life. And I'm quite proud of myself because I think I managed to make the convertible cuff bit look quite a bit like gills. Come on, camera, be proud with me. There we go. So, yeah, I think it looks really cool. Now, you might have noticed that these are not perfect mittens, as in they're not a perfectly matched pair. I did two different things with them. So first of all, notice that the little tail cuffs are different, and this is before blocking, so I'm hoping that once I block them, I'll make them look a little more similar. I'm trying really hard to look more at the lens and less at my screen, which I can see, and I know that means I don't make as much eye contact with you, but that means that I get cut off because I'm not watching the timer. My camera records in like 8-minute segments. Okay, so as I was saying, the cuffs are different. And with this one, I followed the pattern directions, which have you start with a knit two together decrease. So there's one plain one in the middle, and then it's knit two together on this side and SSK on the other. And on this one, I reversed them. I did not mean to. I just didn't look at the pattern when I cast it on. I thought I knew what I was doing, and clearly I was wrong. So yeah, I guess that's a good illustration of the importance of switching your knit two togethers and your SSKs because they're behaving quite differently. As I said, I'm hoping that blocking will make them look a little more similar. Oh, I should mention I did the German twisted cast on because the first row is purling, so I thought that the German twisted cast on would kind of emphasize that. The other mistake that I made, I didn't realize until I finished the second mitten, and so I decided it was not worth it to go back. So the idea with the thumbs is that they look like a fin, which the first one that I knit does. The second one, the eye and the fin, you know, the fin is in the wrong place for a fish. It's not in the wrong place for wearing. They both go on, and that's why I decided to not worry about it. The gift recipient has slightly longer thumbs and fingers than mine, so that's why the thumb tips are. Okay, so you can wear them perfectly fine. They've each got a back and a front. But when I was looking at the chart for the thumb placement, I saw obviously that it was on the other side, and I just didn't realize that it should have been on this side instead of just on the other side of the palm. Basically, I should have made this half the palm, if that makes sense. But since I didn't realize the problem until I had finished this, because obviously you don't knit the eyeball until the end, I decided that it was not worth ripping all the way back to here for, because after all, I mean, most people will see this part of the mittens, and that does mean obviously that the fish are not mirrored the way they would have been if I had done it right. But I decided that they were still cute and that it wasn't that big a deal. So hopefully the gift recipient agrees with me. And they're incredibly warm. I knit them out of Quince & Company Osprey, which is 100% wool, and it's a very soft wool. It's a 3-ply. And I knit them on size 4 needles. I'm not sure exactly what my gauge was. I think that 40 stitches made it about 8 inches in circumference, so that's what, 5 stitches per inch? I'm a loose knitter. But that creates a very thick fabric because it's Aran weight, and it's stranded, so it's doubled throughout. And then with the mitten conversion, that means that right here, it's even double the fabric. So these are super warm and cozy, and I think they will keep her hands very, very snug all winter. So yes, I wanted to share the problems with you because I never want to give the impression that I am like a magically perfect knitter or anything, but I think they still came out absolutely adorable. This is such a fun pattern, and I really think that I need to knit another pair of fish mittens in my future. Hopefully I'll be able to put the thumb in the right place this time, but yeah. So the green is lichen, and that's showing up pretty accurately. And then the cream is egret, which is the undyed one. And, oh, sorry, someone was texting me. Usually I silence my phone. Anyway, and these were the colors that the recipient had picked out for her hat. So I was using basically the leftovers, and I used up pretty much all of the green. I think about 60 grams of the green and maybe 30 grams of the cream. But it'll all be on my project page if you want the specific details. And yeah, I think that's it. In order to get the gills, I just did corrugated rib, but I did purl 2 knit 1 so that it would look a little more line-like. I'm really happy with these, and I think that once they're blocked, they'll look even better. Because of course, all of this bit will smooth out a bit, and I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get the cuffs to look more similar to each other. But as it is, I'm proud to give these as a gift, even if they're not 100% perfect. And I think my recipient will really like them. They're super warm and snuggly. I'm always kind of confused as to why people knit mittens out of fingering weight yarn. Maybe they live in warmer climates, or maybe they wear mittens during transitional weather. But I don't know. I mean, here it gets cold in the winter. Like, we have 3 months where the average high is below freezing. And my hands get cold fairly quickly as it is, so I really want a thick mitten in order to keep that cold and the snow and stuff out. But what I'll probably do before I give them to the recipient, I have that conductive thread that makes mittens smartphone friendly, so I'll probably add a little to the tip of the thumb, and that will make them even more useful. My other finished object is my Distant Shore scarf. So this is knit out of the yarn that Mountain Meadows sent me to review. And I am super happy to have finished this. As you can see, I'll silence my phone when I have to do the next segment. Anyway, As you can see, I have not woven the ends in yet. That's because I prefer to block lace pieces before weaving in the ends, just so that if the size changes dramatically, I will know beforehand. I'm not sure. I think I'll be able to show you the length. So this was knit using a free pattern that was published on Knitty by Rosemary Hill, Romy Hill, and I think it's called the Waves of Grain pattern. And as you can see, it turned out a really good length, and this is before blocking, but I have no intention of blocking it hard. I will block the ends hard so that the beads all show up, because as you can see, right now the beads are hidden. See, so I do need to block the ends fairly hard, but this whole middle section that's just this really pretty mesh, I do not want to block hard, because right now this scarf is so bouncy and woolly and wonderful, and it makes me sad when I block lace projects fairly hard and then they're no longer bouncy and the fabric feels really thin. I've done that on a couple shawls that I've knit and it makes me sad, so I'm going to try really hard to not do that for this project. Okay, so as I was saying, it's a free pattern, and once you do the interesting bits at the end, it's just a 2-row repeat for the entire middle, and you do it in 2 halves. So that worked perfectly because I had 2 50-gram skeins of the yarn. So I was able to use pretty much it all up. I've got like 2 lengths about that long. And at the end, you graft it together. The pattern included directions for grafting that involved knitting with waste yarn so that then you could follow the waste yarn's path for grafting. But the wrong side rows are all just purl back, so they're plain stockinette. So it seemed to me that as long as you finished both halves with a right side row, you would be able to just graft it together and knit the way that you do with a sock toe. So that's what I did. And here is my grafting. Now I'm used to grafting sock toes where the gauge is obviously much finer. So I'm used to pulling those stitches quite snug. I have to start a new segment. As I was saying, so I'm used to grafting quite snugly. So you can definitely see a little bit of a bump right here. I tried to keep it loose, and I think it looks fairly similar as far as gauge goes, and in this sections too. So I think that the bump will block out, but I will report back to you. I'll be sure to wear this on the next episode so that you can see it once it's blocked, because I know blocking can change things like this a lot. So as I said, this yarn was sent to me for free, and I want you guys to be aware of that, but I also would certainly not praise the yarn if I didn't like it. I would just kind of, you know, be polite but not enthusiastic about it. So hopefully you don't think that I'm, you know, just making things up. Anyway, so the yarn is Hannah, which is their heavy lace light fingering, and it's 100% Targhee. And I've never knit with Targhee before, but now I really, really want to. It was so fun to knit with. It's very bouncy, and it knits up into this very bouncy, fun fabric, and it's soft. It's not some of the merino that I felt is kind of I don't know, very smooth, like soft in a very smooth or even like poofy manner. And then some of the other merino crosses that I've knit with, because Targhee is a sheep that has merino back in its heritage, they can be velvety, or I don't know, there's just different textures. And this texture, maybe it's because of the spinning, I would describe as a little bit pebbly, but I mean that in a good way. It's got it's got a kind of personality to it, and it's very soft. Like, I know that pebbles don't really bring up softness, but I don't know. It's really neat, and it's not thick and thin. Like, it's evenly, it's the same weight throughout. So I'm not really sure why it makes me think of pebbles, but soft, bouncy wool pebbles is the best way I can describe it. Hopefully you take that in the spirit that it is intended. As you can see, it looks really great in lace. I mean, this is unblocked, and the yarn overs are already very well defined and open. And I believe that is because it is a 2-ply. Yep, it is. Which Clara Parks in the Book of Yarn talks about how 2-plies are very suitable for lace because they don't fill in yarn overs the way some of the multi-plies do. And I'm sure that since this is a heavy lace weight yarn, it was spun with lace patterns in mind. This is quite a simple lace. And then I love my beads. So yeah, this is definitely next to the skin soft for me on my neck, which is one of my more sensitive areas. I'm sure it is for a lot of people. And 2 skeins made up a nice size scarf, in my opinion. I'm 5'3", so I'm a little bit on the shorter side. What is that in centimeters? Around 160 centimeters. So obviously taller people would need to knit a longer scarf. But yeah, I really enjoyed working with this yarn, and this project required 2 skeins, which would be about $30, which I think, well, I guess everyone has their own budget, but I certainly think that the yarn matches that price, and they have quite a few bases that vary in price. So, oh, the color is navy. That would be the one downside to me for Mountain Meadow yarn, is that their colorways are all hand painted, which is really neat because, you know, a lot of hand dyed yarn is much pricier, even when it's just like spun in a giant factory. So I think if you factor in that hand dyed yarn, their prices become very reasonable. However, whoever's dyeing the yarn clearly likes warm colors, and I love warm colors, but warm colors do not love my skin tone. So that's the one downside to me, is that there aren't very many colorway options if you prefer cooler colors or more muted colors. A lot of the colors are brighter. But I think the navy is a great choice if you prefer colors like me. As you can see, it's on the brighter side for navy, but it's not too bright. And it's got this nice kind of dappled effect. I would definitely highly recommend this pattern as well. As I said, I didn't follow her grafting instructions, so I can't talk about whether those would work or not. But the pattern itself is laid out well and has a really nice effect. I think that everything flows into each other really beautifully. The beads add maximum impact, even though you don't have to use that many beads. And I think it would, and I really enjoyed knitting it in 2 parts. I think if you enjoy knitting things like socks and sleeves, so you're used to doing 2 of the same thing like I do, then this might be a way to make you become a scarf knitter. Before I started this, I did not know if I was going to enjoy knitting scarves. In fact, I suspected that I was going to dislike it. And at the beginning, or like once I finished the cool end and started the body, at first I was like, I'm getting a little bored. But then once I realized that it was just simple knitting and I could relax and my hands got really used to doing the motions, it became a real pleasure. And I was actually quite sad to have finished it and not be able to still be working on it, even though I'm very excited to wear it. So yes, this pattern in yarn has definitely made me a scarf knitter. The one thing I would say is that both times that I began the halves, I had problems with the initial row or 2. The first time I had problems because I tried to put stitch markers between every repeat of the chart so that I could make sure I was on track. However, the very end of the chart involves a 3-stitch decrease that takes one of the stitches from the next repeat. So if you try to do markers, it won't work. You would have to move your markers every row. And So the first time I thought that I had just missed a stitch or whatever, and it took me a couple goes to realize that I just needed to let go of the stitch markers. And then with the second one, I can't remember, the way the chart is written, the square with the lowercase b in it does not mean bead, it means knit through the back loop. And I forgot that, so I did a row with beads that I should not have. And it was like the first or second row, so then I had to rip back and cast on again. So that would be the one thing, is just double check and make sure that you know which squares represent which pattern, and don't try to use stitch markers. So I'm really in love with this project, and once I block it, I'm going to take fun, fancy pictures, probably in the woods, of the finished piece so that you guys will be able to see it in all of its beauty. And I just thought that would be helpful for Mountain Meadow too, in case they need more photos for their advertising or something, because I'm sure they're on a small budget since they're a small business. And I enjoy taking photographs. So that is that. This is the last sponsored yarn you'll see me talking about for at least the rest of the year, just because I don't want this podcast to become terribly commercialized. So I was very happy to get a chance to spread the word about this company, because they're small and they're committed to practices that I really admire. So, but I don't want to be, doing a kind of commercial advertising section every time that I record, as much as I enjoyed knitting with this yarn for free. So yeah, just to let you guys know, there are no future sponsored ones in the plans. I might do one in the next year, we'll see. But for now, you will go back to just seeing me knit with yarn I've knit or received, or yarn I've bought or received for a gift. Yeah. Really love this scarf. I'm so excited about getting to wear it. It's my first successful scarf. The other ones I was trying to do with too little yarn, I think. So this took 650 yards, and that will definitely be my minimum for the length I want. This episode's question was asked by Emi MC. Mimi. Did I say Emi? I apologize. Sometimes I flip things. So her question is about short row neck shaping, because I mentioned that I do that. I do some kind of neck shaping in all my sweaters, because it really bugs me to wear a sweater that's the same height in the back as the front. It doesn't sit right. Okay, so she asked quite a few detailed questions. First, she said, row-wise, so vertically, where do I start and end the shaping, and do I shape in one chunk, or if I'm working something in a pattern, do I sneak some in somewhere? So I do short row shaping the same way that you would do neck shaping with the bind off if you're doing a bottom up sweater, and that's how I usually knit. So basically the short rows just let me bind off all in one row, and it's quite similar to any other, or to Ann Budd, the way that she has you bind off in stages so that the center of the back ends up higher. That's what you want. So usually I do the short rows pretty much right before I'm going to bind off, is where I'll start them, just a few rows ahead, because you have to allow at least a 2 to 3 row margin, so that once you're done doing your short rows, you can, do one row that gets all the stitches back live, and then another row to bind off. Whereas if you're doing your neck shaping via bind off, you can start just right where you're going to finish your sweater. And the reason why I usually do it in short rows, first, is just because I think short rows are fun. And secondly, because if you're doing it in short rows and you're doing a yoke that is done in 2 pieces, then you can do a 3 needle bind off at the shoulders instead of having to seam those shoulders, and I like doing the 3 needle bind off. Short rows shaping also seems to work better if you're doing something like a raglan, because obviously the bind off method is different for a raglan than it is for a traditional set and sleeve sweater. Okay, so I usually start at the end and I do it in one chunk. that can be tricky with some patterns. So I wanted to show you my Fair Isle vest, even though I'm not talking about it as a work in progress, but just because I finished the yokes, the back, and I wanted to show you what I did with this one because it is in pattern. So with this one, instead of doing short rows, because I'm changing colors and stuff, I decided to do the shaping by a staggered bind off, but it has the same effect. So obviously I haven't done the neck band yet, so it's going to want to roll. But as you can, and I've already seamed the pieces together, as you can see, when I hold it, there's definitely, okay, so that's where the seam is. So the center back is definitely just a bit higher than the shoulders are. And I wanted to do it as a bind off this time, just because, I don't know, mentally it seemed easier for me because that way I could switch colors if I wanted to. I ended up not doing that. So what I did with this one is, first I had to decide whether I wanted to be perfectly in pattern or have the neck row shaping. And for me, having a sweater that is comfortable to wear and that fits really well, which wouldn't be the case if I didn't do any neck shaping, is more important than having a sweater that matches perfectly at the seams or at the shoulder seams, or, you know, maintains the perfect pattern throughout. So that's just a question of priorities. So what I did, but you want to make it as unobtrusive as possible. So as you can see, when you look at it down here, these end right here with one stitch. On this one, I just continued that final row for 2 more rows. So these tips are a little longer than all of the other floral tips. And this box is taller than this box, which turned into the bigger flower, if that makes sense. So for 2 rows, I included that. And then for the final 2 rows, I just knit with the plain background stitch because I thought if I made these any longer, they would start to become noticeable. So I think it's one of those things that's, for me at least, easier to decide on once you're there than decide on at the beginning. And this is an all over pattern. If you're doing the kind of pattern that is different in the center than on the sides, then planning in advance makes sense because you know that you're going to be knitting that center panel for a few extra rows. But in this case, you know, I mean, it's all over, so there's nothing I could have done at the beginning to make sure that it would work out. So, okay, what's the next question? So obviously I shaped in one chunk. So she asked about how many rows, 1/2 inch, 1 inch. In this case, I think I did about 1/2 inch. I mean, it's really pretty subtle. It's not a lot of rows. And what I did, so this has, and if it was short rows, it's just you would wrap and turn instead of binding off. So I bound off 1, 2, 3, 4. So this center part, and because you only bind off at the beginning of a row, so each bind off section represents 2 rows. So that means the center part is 8 rows taller than the very edge. And on the front, I bound off in 2 stages. So you can kind of see right at the front how this part is a little longer. And you can also see that they don't match up at the shoulders. The pattern doesn't match up because there was no way that I could get the extra stitches that I wanted and have it match up, so I decided that I would rather have the extra length. One side, this side matches up better than this side, but I will talk about that when this is a finished object because that's not relevant to the question. So yeah, I would say that 8 rows at this gauge is about 1/2 inch. When you're working at a bigger gauge, obviously that means you need fewer rows. So like with, I can't remember with my mom's sweater how many I did. And then she asked horizontally how far out and how do I taper. So basically I knit this at a gauge of about 6.8 stitches to the inch, so about 7 stitches to the inch. And each stage of the bind off, I bound off about 7 more stitches on either side. I did round up or down to make it work a little better with the pattern. So like I bound off at the center of the flower. So yeah, there's some wiggle room there, but I would say you want to bind off about 1 inch at either time. So if you're doing short rows instead of a bind off, that means that each wrap and turn starts 1 inch earlier. So if your gauge was 5 stitches to the inch, every time you go back, you're going to do the wrap and turn 5 stitches earlier than the previous one. And I'm not really sure what the question is about how to taper. Basically, when I'm doing a short row neck, once I've done my wrap and turns, once I finish that center one, I just go all the way back until all of the wraps are picked up. Sometimes that takes 2 rows, and then I'll bind off on the next row. I did want to say, with some sweaters, like this sweater, I was following written directions, and it was top down, and the increases were incorporated into the chart. And especially with this particular pattern, when you look at those charts for the first rounds, it's a lot of charts. And so I didn't really want to try to figure out how to fit short rows in, and I'm not sure I would have been able to. So instead, I put the short row shaping in the ribbing of the neckband. And I will show you that. Don't worry, this is a dress. I'm not going to disrobe in front of you. Although maybe I shouldn't have put so many buttons on. Okay. Yeah, 9 buttons is too many. Sorry, Thistle. Okay. So in this case, hopefully you can see that this ribbing is quite short and this ribbing is quite deep. And in this case, I did use short rows, not a bind off. So I have done it in the neckband before, and that has a similar effect. Basically, I just want more height in the back. So that is the other way if you are very attached to your pattern and you think it would be very noticeable. Like in the case of the Fair Isle, I just didn't think it was noticeable enough to worry about, you know. And like the reason why I didn't care if the shoulder seams matched up perfectly is because if someone is like standing right over my shoulder staring directly down, because the shoulder seam sits here on me, so you're not going to see that if you're just looking at my face talking. And if you're like standing staring down at me, then we have bigger problems to worry about than if my shoulder seams match up perfectly. But I think I did this on one other sweater where I put the short row shaping in the rib. So that is definitely an option if you're doing a neckband. Yes, I did it on my other linen sweater, actually, because it was a B stitch that, well, I don't remember. Maybe I did put that in place. But yeah, so as you can see, I'm not going to be able to find exactly where I wrapped and turned, but once again, I did it in stages. And I did quite a bit of short row shaping back here, because with top-down sweaters with raglans, you know, I mean, that neck line would have been quite low otherwise. So in this case, I probably did an extra inch. Let's see if you compare this to that. It looks like more of an inch. So it really just depends on the sweater and how it's fitting. That's why I like doing bottom-up sweaters, so that I can mess with the yoke at the end. And yeah, so as I was saying, if you don't like short rows and you're doing a bottom-up sweater, you can do the exact same neck shaping by binding off in stages. It's really whatever is more fun for you. I don't know, I like short rows. And with quite a few lace patterns, there will be some kind of repeat. And so in that case, as long as you put your short rows, you know, in between the repeats, then you can continue to work in pattern. And that will be true for smaller color work patterns too. I think it really just depends on the sweater. So the final thing is she mentioned that she was working on a color work yoke. Now I have knit one color work yoke sweater, and the pattern, I'm sorry, she's a British designer and clearly the word has different connotations, but it's called the Wet Wang sweater. I tried really hard not to laugh. I'm sorry. In American slang, that is a very amusing name for a sweater. But it's the one with the swans, the colorwork swans. And that's a top-down sweater, and the way she wrote that pattern, there's a lot of short row shaping. And so even though it's a top-down yoke and you do the yoke all in one piece, the front neckline ends up significantly lower than the back line. And I really like how that fit. I did have some issues in that sweater with extra fabric here, but I found that technique very clever. And I believe that it's a technique that she developed herself. Anne Kingstone is her name. So it might be worth buying one of her patterns to look at that technique, depending on how many colorwork yoke sweaters you plan to do. But yeah, so her short row shaping was below the yoke. So it is definitely possible to put the shaping that raises the back of the neck further down in the sweater, and it can work well. It's just, I haven't really had to do that on my own. I did do it for that pattern, and I was very impressed with how it worked out, but obviously I'm not going to give more details because it was a paid for pattern, but it is definitely possible to do it in places other than right before you're done with your neckline. And I don't know if, I've never tried to just sneak in a row here and there. I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't work. The tricky part would be that when you're doing those short rows, you want to end up with that center as the tallest bit. So each time that you did a short row, you'd have to kind of keep track, you know what I mean, since it's like a stair step. But as long as you're fine keeping track, I think that that would work very well. That was a lot of rambling about neck shaping. I hope that it was helpful. And now the Knits in the Wild segment is back. Several of these are photos that I've taken from Instagram because I haven't gotten into the habit of taking photos with my real camera yet. But I'll just put them in. They were taken with my iPhone, so I apologize for the not so good quality. And I'm going to start a new segment just so that it'll be easier for me when I'm editing. And yeah, let's look at some photos of how I wear my knitwear. So first up, on a slightly cool but not super cool day, I wore a long sleeve cotton t-shirt with a skirt, and I didn't need a sweater, but I wanted a little something extra, so I wore a fingering weight blush shawl. This is my Dawn's Rosy Fingers shawl, and I was very confused about how to wear it until I decided to just wear it as a cowl. I think I was wearing it on my last episode, so this might have been from last Sunday. And I just wrapped it around my neck, and then I used a brooch to keep it in place. And then the skirt I was wearing had a floral pattern, and so I picked up one of the purple shades from the skirt and wore my purple socks to go with it. Next, I wore my cabled cardigan, which is my Selkie Second Skin cardigan, which is self-designed. And this was a cold day, so I had to wear wool tights under my dress, but I put on cream socks to echo the cream cardigan, and then I put on my red as blood beret, which is kind of a wine red, and it picked up one of the colors from this dress. I like matchy-matchy clothes, which, especially lately, I've been into very matchy-matchy. So I wore that blush shawl again, with my gingerbread tam, which also obviously has a lot of blush colors in it. I was excited to give that hat its first wearing. And I wore those with my tan trench coat because I wanted to look very fall-like. Then on Friday, it wasn't that cold, but it was brisk. So I put on a burgundy corduroy blazer, and I pretty much went all out as far as matching went. I also wore my burgundy leaf mitts. As you can kind of see in the photo, they blend really well into the jacket, but they are there. And a striped tam I made that has burgundy stripes. I also wore my burgundy leaf socks, but they are not in the photo. And finally, before I started recording this episode, I went ahead and took a photo of my full outfit today. As you can see, I am wearing my formalized Curiosity cardigan, all buttoned up, over a much paler pink sundress. Guess I've been in a blush mood lately, huh? And pinks. Anyway, and then I'm wearing this little piggy socks, which are similarly blush colored. It's not cold enough to need tights or pants or anything, but my feet get cold really easily, so I wear wool socks even when I wouldn't be able to wear a wool sweater. So that is what I've been wearing recently. I need to get back in the habit of photographing full outfits, but yeah, lots of matchy-matchy, lots of tonal color variations, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. Okay, let's see. I think next I will do a yarn review. Now, on my last episode, I mentioned that I haven't loved every yarn I've ever knit with. So I thought I would go ahead and do a review of 2 yarns I would not work with again today, just so that you guys have an idea of what causes me to dislike a yarn, since obviously by now you know that what makes me like a yarn. I was really surprised that several of you ordered Elsa wool after I gushed about it in the last review. Pleasantly surprised, but also kind of terrified that some of you might not love it as much as I did, but it looks like everyone who ordered it, at least on Instagram, also finds it really squishy and velvety and magical, so whew. I don't know why that surprised me so much, but it did. I don't know, I was just surprised. Okay, so I thought I would talk about 2 sock yarns that disappointed me today. The first one is Lorna's Laces Shepherd Sock Solid. This is a hand-dyed yarn. It's 100% merino, I believe. No, I think it has some nylon in it. Should have checked. Anyway, I bought this yarn right before I moved to New York from Texas. It was kind of my going away, the last time I could visit my local yarn store in Texas, which I really loved. And so I treated myself to a couple skeins that I've been eyeing for a long time, but that before I thought were too pricey. I wanted to, give them a last hurrah of support and get myself some pretty yarn. So I bought this yarn because I adored the color. It's called Bigger on the inside, but I don't think this is a TARDIS blue at all. Actually, there it is. Huh. Anyway, it's a very beautiful tonal faded navy, and I knit these socks using the Paraphernalia pattern. So up here they look good, right? But look at this. I don't understand, how that could have happened. Somehow the yarn is pilling white, even though it's a blue dye. And the thing is, this started happening really early. Even just the first time I washed the socks, they had already started to fade a bit. I should have grabbed the leftover yarn so that you could see the difference. So they're already a bit lighter than they were. And then they just started pilling tremendously. So to be fair to the sock pattern, I went ahead and I attempted to depill one, and I left the other the way it was. And these have been washed. I haven't worn them since the last washing, so don't worry about that. This is the one that I tried to depill, and this is the one that I left plain. As you can see, even though I got quite a few of the pills off, it didn't change that discoloration at all. And not only is the discoloration on the sole, it's also on the heel flap and on the top of the toe. And that's very disappointing because that means that when I wear the socks around the house, I see that, and it annoys me secretly because this skein costs much more than I usually pay for sock yarn, and it has worn much worse. So that definitely frustrated me. Also, the yarn was kind of stiff when I was knitting up with it, so it wasn't a super enjoyable knitting experience, even though the fabric softened considerably once I blocked it. So they're comfy to wear, but it just wasn't that fun to knit with. So here's, once again, the difference. I seriously have no clue why it turned white where the most wear is. You can tell that I have a high arch since the middles are perfectly fine. But yeah, I would not buy this yarn again because that depresses me. I guess I should say how I wear my socks. So I wear hand knit socks most of the year because my feet get cold quickly. I would say I wear them at least 9 months out of the year. When I am inside, I do not wear shoes. Sometimes I wear slippers, but I never wear shoes in the house. And My flooring is hardwood floors and linoleum in my kitchen. When I lived in Texas, my flooring was carpet. I don't know if that makes a difference. I also didn't wear shoes in Texas. I grew up in a no shoes indoors household, so when I'm outdoors, obviously I wear shoes. And I don't drive, so I walk 2 to 3 miles when I'm feeling well and half a mile to a mile when I'm feeling unwell. So that's pretty much how I use my socks. Yeah, just in case. I mean, I guess, but I don't know. Like, it started looking like that quite early on. So, yes. Disappointing because of how it wore. The other pair I'm talking about today is also disappointing because of how it wore. I have other sock yarns that have been disappointing for other reasons, but that will be another episode. So these are those burgundy socks that I mentioned wearing on Friday. They look better on camera than in person. These are knit out of Cascade Heritage Sock, which is their wool. Is it also merino? This is information that I should look up beforehand. But it's their basic wool sock yarn, so it is probably half the price of the Lorna's laces. I had used their Heritage Paint, which is also wool, for a pair of socks I knit for my grandmother, and those were wonderful. So when I wanted burgundy socks, this is when I was still buying all the yarn at the local yarn store. So I saw this burgundy color and I thought, perfect, so that'll be fine. But this yarn, it did not hold up. Like these socks, the yarn started pilling when I was still knitting the socks. And as you can see, maybe, the leaves have kind of matted. I've decided that I don't think it's called felting when there's still like give. Oh, there we go. But the stitches are all blending together. I mean, maybe is it clearer on this side? I'm not sure how close I can get to this lens. I don't know if you can see that, but basically instead of each stitch looking like its own anymore, they're all kind of matted together. And that's just on the leg, which doesn't get the most wear. As you can see, well, hang on. As you cannot see because I'm not putting the socks on camera. So these have been worn since I washed them last. I apologize for all the cat fur. I can't vacuum that frequently. Well, I hate vacuuming. It hurts my neck and shoulders, so I don't vacuum frequently, and my cat really likes to shed, so I apologize in advance for all this fur. But once again, I tried to depill one and not the other, just so that you could see. And this yarn obviously is much easier to depill, because look at the difference on the heel flap. So these pills just pulled off. The pills on the Lorna's laces are like embedded in the fabric. There was almost nothing I could do to get rid of them. So at least this one can be depilled. But here, maybe the felting I'm talking about is most obvious on here. But yeah, they've looked worn and shabby almost since I knit them. And they've just gotten shabbier throughout the couple years that I've had them. So that's very disappointing to me. There are 2 caveats for these socks as far as wear goes. First of all, I knit them at 7.5 stitches to the inch, not 8 inches to the inch. I was still fairly new to knitting, and I thought that if I knit a 56-inch sock at a tighter gauge, it wouldn't fit my foot. That's wrong. I could have just knit these at 56 stitches. So that could have something to do with how this fabric is worn, especially since it's a lace pattern. So I did not make the fabric as tight as I would nowadays. The other caveat is when I was reading the reviews of this yarn on Ravelry soon after I finished knitting it, I noticed that someone said that she had knit several pairs of socks in different colors and liked the yarn, and then she got the burgundy and she didn't like it at all. So maybe there's something different in the burgundy dyeing process that makes it less quality, that makes it just more prone to like looking old. It looks so much better on the camera. That's annoying. I'm gonna have to take some photos or something so that you can see. I don't know. These look really shabby to me. And that's disappointing because burgundy is one of my favorite colors to wear. And so one of these days I plan to reknit this pattern in a different burgundy yarn. But yeah, so I would consider knitting with Cascade Heritage again in a different colorway if a lot of you have told me that you have good success with it. And obviously I would knit it at a tighter gauge. But yes, so both of those sock yarns disappointed me because the yarn just was not sturdy enough. And there you have it. I much enjoy doing the happy yarn reviews, but I thought it would be good to do a more negative one just so that you can see the difference, and hopefully it'll give you a little more context to understand my happy reviews too. And yeah, I don't know, maybe those yarns would work fine for neckwear, but obviously I do not recommend them for knitting socks. Okay, so on to our topic. This was so funny. She's spread out in my lap. I wish you guys could see her. Anyway, I thought that I would talk a little bit this week about wardrobe planning because I have just finished my scarf and I'm close to finishing my Fair Isle vest. I've been thinking about what I want to knit next. And yeah, I just thought it would be interesting. So basically, as far as sweaters go, I have several sweater quantities in stash, so I've already made some of these wardrobe decisions, but when I was thinking about what I wanted to knit next, I thought about what colors I enjoy wearing in the autumn. And even though I tend to wear cool muted colors all year, there's quite a bit of range within that palette, and so I do tend to wear certain colors more frequently in certain seasons. So I happen to have I bought a sweaters quantity in a beautiful cool brown last fall. This is Canopy Fingering in the Sarsaparilla. I don't know, is that Spanish? Should it be Sarsaparilla? I don't know. I've never heard that word before. Anyway, it's a fingering weight yarn, and it's 50% baby alpaca, 30% merino, 20% viscose bamboo, and it's really soft. I got this in an incredible D-stash. I got it for less than 50% of retail, which included shipping. As you can see, it's about as dark as I would want to go, but sometimes I like going darker because it reminds me a little bit of, I don't know, that kind of Victorian governess look. I guess I have a tiny bit of goth in me, so. Anyway, so I decided that I would knit this sweater next so that I can wear it hopefully in late fall. So that was the first decision I made. And then as far as what kind of sweater I wanted to knit with it, I have 1,600 yards of this, so obviously I don't need to worry about yardage. Well, I say obviously. The sweaters I've knit in the past have taken between 8 and 1,300 yards, and the 1,300 ones were the cabled cardigan and then the really long lace cardigan that I made. So, yeah, so that's the average yardage for my body. So 1,600 yards is more than enough to play with. And so I was thinking about it, and especially in the autumn, which is when I'm most likely to wear this, I tend to wear more jumpers plus skinnies, and some of my skinnies are not high-rise. I prefer high-rise trousers, which are pretty much, well, now they're coming back into style, which is exciting, but for a long time they were not in style, so I just thrifted them. So my winter, and they tend to be wool, so my winter wardrobe has several pairs of high-rise wool trousers. But for my autumn one, I tend to wear more skinnies, and most of them are not high-rise, so I need a longer jumper. The hand-knit jumpers that I've knit are not long enough to wear with quite a few of my skinnies. And the colors of those would work with this brown. So I knew that I wanted a longer jumper because of that. This yarn is very luxurious and drapey. Well, it will be drapey because of all the alpaca and bamboo. And it just has a really beautiful sheen to it. Like, it looks rich. And so I decided that this would be perfect for a sweater inspired by Phryne Fisher of the Miss Fisher's Detective Agency show, which you should watch if you have not watched it yet, because it is wonderful. I love that show so much. And it's set in 1929, but Phryne's costume choices are definitely not typical of a 1920s woman, which is fine with me. She's not a typical 1920s woman, and she's very rich. So she wears a lot of flowy, dressy clothes. And obviously what she does do is where she doesn't, like, the waistlines are dropped. But because they're so drapey, it's very flattering. And the actress who plays Phryne has kind of a similar body type to me. She's got broader shoulders, and she doesn't have like a very full chest or anything. She is much taller than me, I think. But anyway, so because of that, I found it very interesting how flattering those styles were to her. So since I wanted a longer sweater anyway, I want to do a kind of flapper inspired. And one of the things in the very first episode, she wears this sailor's collar dress, and I love fancy collars on tops, and they're very difficult to find in retail, so I don't have many in my wardrobe. So I thought, hey, I should knit one. And the collars do tend to be more dramatic, and they tend to be more girly, like they can read young in this day and age. So I thought that putting it in a very sober color, brown, and doing it in a very luxurious, grown-up looking fabric would kind of balance out the sailor collar. So if I'm ever going to knit a sailor collar sweater, I should do it now. So that is how I arrived at the thought process for what I'm going to make with this yarn. It's not as dark as it's showing here. I think the clouds have moved in, so probably it looks like I'm just like a glowing face and the rest of the apartment is dark. Anyway, so yeah, as you can see, first I thought about what context I wanted to wear the sweater in, then I thought about length and all that kind of thing, and then I thought about what styles are really appealing to me and how it would work with the yarn content, because this will be a very drapey sweater. The other thing I thought about is with 50% baby alpaca, this could be too warm for me, and so for the body, I'm going to do a very subtle eyelet pattern. It's called Broderie Anglaise, and it's not even, like, you don't do the eyelets with yarn over, so they're very small, so I think I'll still be able to wear it with nothing underneath and not, be super risque, or I could wear a camisole underneath. I have several camisoles. Anyway, and that'll provide a little bit of ventilation so that I won't, like, overheat or anything. I suppose rather than general wardrobe planning, that was a very specific look at how I decided to do one sweater. But we can extrapolate from that, and I suppose I always think about what I want to wear the sweater with when I'm deciding fit and length and color and that type of thing. The other sweater that I have planned for this season, and I was trying to decide which one to knit first, I decided on the brown one since we're currently in autumn. So hopefully I can finish it in November before proper winter hits. It's going to be a purple colorwork cropped sweater. And I decided on that one, well, basically I tend to wear crop sweaters with skirts and dresses and then my very high-waisted woolen trousers in the winter. And a lot of those are in neutral colors, so it was okay for me to do a more colorful sweater because I would have a lot of things to wear with it, if that makes sense. And since even though it's fingering weight, it's all over stranded colorwork, so it's going to be a quite warm sweater, so that's why I wanted to make sure it went with my winter wardrobe. And I managed to find a vintage wool purple plaid skirt on eBay this year, so I will be able to do crazy matchy-matchy if I want. I think it might be too much since it's going to be Fair Isle, but we'll see. Anyway, so yes, I suppose that, and I know I've talked about wardrobe planning before in general terms, but maybe maybe giving a couple specific examples was helpful to you. In addition to sweater wardrobe planning, the other thing I've been thinking about is accessories. And I really want to do kind of purple and brown, I suppose. So I plan to knit a pair of knee-high socks that have brown cuffs. If I have yarn left over after I finish the sweater I'm about to start, I'll do the cuffs in the matching yarn because the cuffs are what peek out of knee-high boots, so that'll be fun. And then I also have the yarn to do a pair of purple knee-high socks. And once again, the cuffs will be purple so that when I'm wearing it with my knee-high boots, you'll be able to see that. And as far as kind of scarves and hats and that thing goes, I have a couple brown neckwear options, but I did get the yarn to do a purple scarf because that will go, none of my winter coats are purple. Several of them are neutrals, and then I have a red one and kind of a steel blue one. Yes, those are my two colorful ones. So purple will go with, it's a very muted mauve color. And yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is I tend to wardrobe plan in like color sets. I'll find because I like to wear matchy-matchy clothes. Obviously, if you don't like to wear matchy-matchy clothes, you don't need to plan in color sets. But that's kind of how I go about it. And over the years, I've learned what silhouettes are most comfortable for me, and those do change throughout the seasons. For instance, I almost never wear skirts in the summer. It's only dresses or shorts because I don't want anything tight around my waist in the summer. Whereas in winter, that's not a problem. And yeah, so I guess, I don't know. I wrote down wardrobe planning as the topic when I was doing my outline, but I didn't really think about what I was going to talk about as far as specifics go. So I am happy to readdress this in a more general way. Let me know if you have any questions about wardrobe planning or that type of thing, or if it was useful to you to talk through my specific process. I guess I could talk about also with my Fair Isle vest, which you can no longer see because of the darkness. I chose these colors not just because I liked them, but also because I have quite a collection of blazers and jackets that I wear in the autumn and springtime. I've worn the same size clothing since I was 20 years old, so I have and I enjoy clothes, so I have an extensive wardrobe. But these colors went with almost all the jackets and blazers in my closet, so I knew that I would be able to wear this as a layering piece underneath all of those without any difficulties. So I always try to think about what clothes I'm going to be combining it with and how the colors and shapes will all work. And that's also why this is cropped, is because, as I said, as soon as autumn arrives, I start to wear a lot of skirts and dresses. Well, when I'm not wearing skinnies. I'm not sure if I'd wear this with skinnies, but I'll definitely wear it with skirts and dresses. I apologize for that rambling. Next time I'll try to, think about my topic beforehand. Finally, I have a knitting quote to share with you from a novel I was reading. And I've talked about this series before. I really love it. So this is the second, The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making by Catherynne Valente. And I think I read to you When She Got an Orange Dress. But later, I could not resist sharing this moment. Oh, where is it? Okay, I found it. So September meets a Minotaur, a woman Minotaur, and it turns out that she is also a knitter. She stood up. The Minotaur towered over all of them, her shoulders muscled, her legs powerful. That was easy to see, even with the plain skirt to cover them. She crossed to a home-hewn rocking chair near the hearth and settled herself into it, taking up a scrap of knitting from a basket, the ball of translucent yarn looking very much like the spindle in the painting above her. She gestured absent-mindedly at the black logs with one knitting needle. They burst into eager flame. Her fingers wrapped the yarn deftly as she talked. So yeah, I just really love. Valente herself is a knitter, and I love that she I don't know, her imagination is incredible, and that she creates this knitting minotaur is fabulous. Let me see. No, the illustration doesn't include the knitting, but yeah. And then I had one more bit to share with you. So this is a really wonderful nonfiction book called Braiding Sweetgrass: Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Kimmerer is a botanist, and she has a PhD, and she's a professor, and she's also a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, which means that she's Native American. And this book is a wonderful combination of personal stories, philosophies from both her particular Potawatomi, nation and other Native American nations, as well as science, more traditional Western science. And it is a reflection on ecology and how we live in this world that seems to be coming to pieces because of what we've done in the past, and how do we retain our hope and love and forge a new connection, basically. And one of the themes running through it that I really love is that we are part of nature too. And so we are, we're not just this thing separate from nature that is destroying it. We are part of nature, and we need to really embrace that in order to come up with a solution. Anyway, I think this is the best nature writing book that I've ever read, and I'm rereading it now. And what I wanted to share with you was, so it's a collection of essays, basically. And she did an essay on basket weaving. Let's see. Where she went and she learned how to weave baskets with a master basket weaver. And these baskets are made out of black ash trees, smaller black ash trees. And there's a moment, man, how have I not marked any of the passages I wanted to share with you? Okay, so it's from the essay, I'm going to mispronounce this, Wiskagokpinagan, a black ash basket. I apologize for having no clue how to pronounce that. And so the class, which is led by John Pigeon, who is also Potawatomi, he begins the class by them finding a tree that they're going to cut down to turn into a basket. And it turns out that actually the places where these basket makers are working have much more of these trees than other places where they're not working. And so certain kinds of harvesting, the kind that follows the traditional methods, actually improves the health overall of these tree species. Anyway, that's not the point for this. Okay, so obviously once you cut the tree down, there's all kinds of work that you have to get to in order to get the strips that you're going to weave the basket out of. And once they have done all this, the teacher has them stop. And let's see. Okay. Just think of the tree and all its hard work before you start, he says. It gave its life for this basket, so you know your responsibility. Make something beautiful in return. Responsibility to the tree makes everyone pause before beginning. And then, oh, here's the other spot. Okay. So with the splints finally prepared, we're poised for weaving, what we had mistakenly thought was the real work of a basket. But John stops the class, his gentle voice gaining a hard edge. You've missed the most important thing, he said. Look around you. We look at the forest, at the camp, at each other. At the ground, he says. In a circle around each novice is a litter of scraps. Stop and think what you're holding. That ash tree was growing out there in that swamp for 30 years, putting out leaves, dropping them, putting out more. It got eaten by deer, hit by a freeze, but it kept working year in and year out, laying down those rings of wood. A splint fallen on the ground is a whole year of that tree's life, and you're about to step on it, bend it, grind it into the dirt. That tree honored you with its life. There's no shame in messing up a splint, you're just learning. But whatever you do, you owe that tree respect and should never waste it. And so he guides us as we sort through the debris we've made. Short strips go into a pile for small baskets and decoration. The miscellaneous bits and shavings get tossed into a box to be dried and used for tinder. John keeps to the tradition of the honorable harvest. She talks about this more in a different essay. Take only what you need and use everything you take. So I found that very moving because I think that as knitters, we're working with natural materials. And if we're working with a silk blend yarn, those silk moths have given their lives for the silk. Usually, or at least they've given their energy. And if we're working with wool yarns, then the sheep have given their fleece, and of course, they've also given their lambs, because wool, the price of fleeces is not high enough to sustain ranching. So the wool industry is secondary to the meat industry. So, lambs are sold to the butcher, and that's how the ranchers make their money. And so whenever we're knitting with wool, we're knitting with something very valuable, and it's something that represents a life and work by both animals and people, and sacrifices as well. And I just thought that was a very lovely reminder of how working with the wool and kind of bringing it to its full potential is a way of really honoring that. I don't know. It's difficult to talk about these kinds of issues, isn't it? But I think that's part of why I love swatching so much, is because when I'm swatching, it's a chance to really listen to that wool and honor the particular qualities of that wool. Or even if you're not swatching, when you're looking for a pattern, if you know that certain wools or natural fibers are going to be drapier than others, then you can look for a pattern that's going to work with that instead of against it, and just thinking about that yarn so that it makes the loveliest finished object that it can make, and trying not to be wasteful and that kind of thing. I don't know. I just found that very moving. The entire essay is beautiful, as is the book. I can't recommend that book highly enough. But that just struck me as a passage that would be something that other people who do handcrafts would want to hear. So that is all for today, and I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thistle certainly enjoyed her nap. And there she is. I know you guys liked it when she sat like this for all of the last episode. You're too cute. But yeah, she is definitely a lap puppy who will sit in my lap for hours and hours. I'm very lucky. Once again, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all for giving me the courage and the passion and the motivation to keep podcasting over the last year, and who have made me so welcome. And I don't know, thank you for your friendship and your support. And I will see you next week. Bye.